We generally assume that we possess a deep, essential self hidden inside us, a core identity that is held back or repressed by the rules of society. We usually think of power as a possession, a noun, a tool held by a central authority, like a sovereign state, to force citizens' obedience. In this classical view, the state operates on its own distinct law of behavior, its raison d'etat, or reason of state. This institutional logic often directly contradicts the personal morality of the individuals living under it. This creates a specific mental model of society, a heavy, downward pressure applied by the powerful to oppress the natural, creative essence of the powerless. Treating power as a top-down, oppressive force misses how modern society operates. It leaves us unable to see how our identities are actually manufactured. The 20th century French philosopher Michel Foucault broke from this classical model of state sovereignty. Foucault redefined power as a strategy, an active verb performed in specific contexts. It exists only through its exercise within a system of relations. Power circulates. It operates through a capillary, net-like organization spread throughout all social relations. You are not an elementary nucleus struck from the outside. Instead, individuals are the vehicles of power, the exact places where these relations are enacted. Power isn't locked in government buildings or hidden inside church hierarchies. It is dispersed through every interaction. Which brings us to sexuality. Your deep, essential sexual identity is not being repressed by this network of power. Rather, it was entirely invented by it. To understand what philosophers call the death of man, the realization that human nature is not fixed, we have to look at exactly how the 19th century manufactured the concept of sexuality to anchor the individual. We look at this image of a 19th century Victorian street and immediately associate the era with extreme prudery and strict moral regulation. This stands in sharp contrast to the 17th century, where sexual matters were treated with a surprising degree of frankness and publicness. Foucault calls this 19th century shift the repressive hypothesis, a society-wide attempt to silence discussions of sex and confine them strictly behind closed bedroom doors. Yet looking at the historical record reveals a paradox. This attempt at silencing was highly ineffective. It actually caused a massive society-wide increase in discourse about sex. By officially condemning sex as a prohibited taboo, the mere act of speaking about it took on the appearance of a deliberate transgression. The repression itself increased the desire to speak. This exposes our modern belief that we are liberating ourselves through unfettered sexual expression as a trap. We are simply fulfilling the unintended, paradoxical effects of Victorian-era strategies. Before the 18th century, the control of desire was a religious matter. Look at this traditional confessional booth. Here, power was concerned with regulating the flesh, demanding an annual accounting of specific transgressive acts. But observe this Victorian consulting room. By the 19th century, the religious confession had evolved into a clinical, medical, and psychological investigation. This marked the birth of Scientia Sexualis, a new science of sex that replaced religious moral codes with clinical categorization. Doctors, psychiatrists, and gendarmes became the new authorities. They operated on the assumption that difficult truths were rooted in biology, emanating from the unconscious depths of the personality. The 19th century transformed isolated sexual acts into permanent identity categories. A person's sexual preference began to determine the very species of individual they were. Their desire became their truth. These medical experts did not unearth a hidden reality. Power actually implanted the idea that your sexual desires are your deepest truth, specifically to make you a knowable, governable subject. Foucault argued this construction of sexuality operated along three axes: scientific knowledge about behavior, systems of power regulating acts, and the forms of self-recognition. The Scientia Sexualis mapped the human body to create a specific domain of knowledge. To validate its existence, it required a stable foundation: sex. Foucault argues this biological reality is an imaginary point, a construct justifying the scientific management of our bodies. This exposes the failure of modern philosophy to forge a coherent understanding of humanity, an error Foucault calls the analytic of finitude. We try to view human beings as both the creative source of the world and a measurable object within it. But it is not the activity of a free subject that produces knowledge. It is a combined force called power knowledge that dictates what can even be known in a given era. This is what is meant by the death of man. The individual is not an unconstrained creative essence, but an effect. The deployment of sexuality proves that what we consider our most private, natural self is actually the result of infinitesimal mechanisms of power invested directly into our bodies. If power is dispersed everywhere, and our very identities are historical constructs, it raises an obvious question. Is there any room left for freedom? Foucault specifies a hard prerequisite. Power relations are only possible if the subjects involved are free. If someone is completely at the disposal of another, there is no relation of power. There is only limitless violence. Because power requires a degree of freedom on both sides, the possibility of resistance is structurally built into the network. Resistance does not exist outside the system. It is a fundamental condition of it. As power operates along a continuum, its becoming productive nature actually provides subjects with the very language and concepts they can use to push back against it. Therefore, liberation cannot come from digging deep inside yourself to unearth a true sex. Doing so just returns you to the very medical and psychological categories that power set up in the first place. Instead of clinging to identity categories, Foucault offers a different focal point, the reality of bodies and the intensity of their pleasures. He envisions a state of categorical indeterminacy, viewing the body as unformed matter that exists entirely prior to the imposition of a true sex by a normalizing grid. To navigate this, he points to the ancient ethical concept of ascesis. Ascesis is a process of self-formation, the active, creative, aesthetic fashioning of one's own manner of being. It is the conscious decision to shape your own existence, breaking away from passive obedience to historically instituted codes of moral behavior. This is why Foucault's work serves as a paradoxical critique of modern sexual liberalization. We mistakenly believe that rigidly categorizing our sexual preferences is the path to freedom, when it is actually a mechanism of control. The death of man is not a tragedy. It is the necessary clearing of the ground, stripping away the illusion of a fixed human nature, so we can creatively invent new, improbably free ways of existing.